Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week we interview experts in AI, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. In our show today, we look at responsible AI. I'm joined by Rohan Sen, Data Risk and Privacy Principal, PricewaterhouseCoopers US. Rohan, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be here.
So just to get us started, could you give us a quick introduction and tell us a little bit about your role at PwC?
Absolutely. My day job is to be a data risk and privacy principal, as you said, delivering engagements for clients. In addition to that, I hold two roles. I'm responsible for the Gen AI adoption within our cyber risk and regulatory platform that sits in our advisory business. And I also coordinate our responsible AI efforts for our advisory business here in the US. A computer scientist by training, a technologist that lives in the risk world these days.
Interesting. Great. Well, I'm really happy you're here. I took a look at the survey and a few other things on your site, and I'm really interested in diving into the topic. I think trust, safety, responsible, all those words around AI are extremely top of mind for most of the companies that I talk to anyway. So to get us started, could you give us an overview of the responsible AI survey and then some of the key findings? Anything that surprised you in the results?
Sure. So, we did the responsible AI survey. It's been a couple of months. We surveyed over 1,000 US executives across a number of different industry sectors, right? I would say the findings were not overly surprising, but maybe validating, if you will, right? So some of the key stats, 8 in 10 people, right, said that they would be adopting or have adopted AI or Gen AI. I think since it's been a couple of months, that number may have already ticked up a little bit.
Probably.
Only 58% had thought about the risks and governance, which was interesting. When we asked folks, are you taking a responsible AI approach to your AI adoption and your AI journey? About 48% said yes. But when we broke it down into the component parts, very few people ticked everything, right? And so when you sort of take the data and sort of break it up, really only 14% felt that they had gotten a good start on all of the capabilities that are needed for responsible AI, and furthermore, only 11% felt that they actually had the operational ability to make good on those promises. So that shows we're at the start of a journey, but that's a quick rundown of what we saw.
Good. Well, so that really does make me see that, a lot of companies are challenged by this. And I've actually written some on that recently as well, because I think it's an area that there does seem to be, and I guess it's not surprising because, certainly a lot of companies, we are very early in their journey.
Absolutely.
But I'm curious, so what do you see as the biggest challenges that companies face when they're trying to implement a responsible AI governance framework?
Yeah, so let me maybe break it out into a couple of pieces, right? As you say, and we see this consistently throughout the survey, there is a spectrum of maturity across companies, right? And there's even a spectrum of maturity across the different capabilities that make up responsible AI, right? So I think at the top of the house, a challenge that we often see is, well, who should actually be in charge of responsible AI? Right? We've seen some organizations give it to the privacy officer, right? Hey, you were responsible for safeguarding our consumers' data. Perhaps you should take responsible AI. Some people have given it to model risk management, right? Some people have given it to the CDO, right? So it's a little bit all over the place, right? And I'll sort of plug my colleague Jen Kosar's article on the case for the chief AI officer, right? Where we really believe that you need somebody to bring it all together and be sort of that single person truly responsible for responsible AI, right? So I think there's a struggle as to who owns this and do they have the appropriate span of control to actually execute on it. That's number one, right? Number two is, as you know, AI touches a number of different parts of the organization. There are a number of different risks, from cyber to privacy to data and so on. And so orchestrating all of these different types of risks is going to be, a challenge. And it's always, tough to sort of get a whole bunch of people to sort of get together and row in the same direction, right? And so, stakeholder engagement, and making sure that we're all on the same page is critical as well, and it's something that I think companies are learning.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I see that a lot in discussions with companies, like who owns it. It's very much a maturity level. I think there's a lot of companies are either at that sort of early stage of experimentation where we now all of a sudden see shadow IT again because people are bringing their own tools in and perhaps there's some risk around that, but we aren't really coordinating that very effectively all the way up to companies that are really intentional about what they're doing. But even so, governance is something that crosses a lot of boundaries, as you say. So I think that's interesting.
Absolutely. And I actually heard the term shadow AI the other day, right? That's really becoming
Yeah.
a thing. And you're absolutely right. I think in addition, it's shining a spotlight on what I call sort of the ancillaries, right?
Mhm.
And for example, data governance is getting its day in the sun because you need to have the right data to build the
Yeah.
right type of AI solutions.
Yep.
And so it's perhaps shining a spotlight on other parts of sort of the governance spaces
Mm.
that may need some attention.
Yeah, actually, that does make sense. I mean, I know the conversations I've had around data, and now also around data automation, data quality. There's all sorts of new AI driven data tools to make the data ready for the AI to use, which sounds a little circular, but you get the point. I know, and so I'm sure that's the foundation of everything. So starting there probably does make a lot of sense from that perspective. Yeah.
Absolutely. And look, I'm firmly of the belief that if you do not have the right data, you're going to start seeing issues down the line, right? You touched upon quality, right? Something that we hear a lot, sort of in the media and sort of in the general discourse is bias, right?
Mhm.
And making sure that you have sort of the right demographic distributions in your data to be, that sort of fit for purpose. Those
Mhm.
sort of things become very, very important. So absolutely, it starts with the data and then it goes on to, some of the many other aspects that I'm sure we'll get into here in a second.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. Well, I mean, one of the things that comes up a lot in the survey, and honestly, a lot in conversations all over
Mhm.
the business world today, is trust. And
Mhm.
trust in AI is kind of a complicated thing, and yet it's absolutely essential for businesses to get to the point where they're comfortable adopting, right? So, what do you think businesses should be doing to build that trust and then manage the risk both internally and externally?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, trust is key, right? We really believe that trust is something that's earned, right? And you earn it by doing the right things. So now, what might those right things be? We honestly believe that a responsible approach to AI, right, which comes with various, a very holistic sort of risk management approach is one of the steps to earning that trust. We
Mm,
believe that if you take a responsible approach to AI, you've sort of laid the foundations to be able to do AI correctly, right? And that if you're able to do AI correctly and you're able to show that in practice to your stakeholders, you begin to start earning
mm,
trust, right? So that I think is the short term sort of how I expect things to play out
right.
down the line. And some of this from regulatory aspects, some of it, frankly, just from the fact that we are all there's a lot of sort of publicly traded organizations. There is going to be sort of audits of AI in some shape or form, which will be sort of the other form of trust, if you will,
Mhm.
that that is fostered through sort of external validation of what you might be doing with your AI or how you're using it in your operations.
Mm. I mean, that seems like that would in fact be a big help when it comes to establishing trust, not just with your employees, although certainly that'd be important, but more importantly, maybe with your customers and partners as they interact with you and they can see that you're effectively building trust or dealing with the risk around the use of those tools. So yeah, that makes sense.
Absolutely. And if I may, Michael,
Sure.
one thing that goes with trust is transparency, right?
Mm,
And building things in a way that you can explain to your stakeholders, whether it be your employees, your customers,
mhm,
your board, right, is again, fundamental in my view,
Mm.
engendering trust.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm on a couple of boards, and that's a topic that we get into quite often, and I
Yeah.
think it's really important for the board to be engaged in that, conversation, particularly around risk mitigation, but also around the advantages and, the differentiation. Which brings me to something else. In the survey, I know I saw data that shows that competitive differentiation was one of the objectives, one of the primary objectives for investing in responsible AI. So, how can organizations leverage responsible AI to gain competitive advantage or competitive edge using the AI?
That was one of the most heartening data points in the survey, Michael. While we obviously believe that responsible AI can be a competitive differentiator, it was great to see it validated by the respondents at large. Look, I think part of responsible AI is showing that you're going to do right by your stakeholders,
Mm,
right? And the way that you do right by stakeholders is the nitty-gritty risk management stuff. You start with the right data, you make sure it has the right quality, you take the correct cybersecurity measures to protect your AI solution.
mm,
You do it in a in a way that respects individual privacy where that's appropriate and
mm,
relevant, right? And
yeah,
all of that can be a differentiator in how people perceive your organization, your products. And if you're not doing it right, then we see that being a disadvantage.
mm,
We sort of have seen this play out a little bit in the privacy space, right? So when we sort of started, and I'm dating myself a little bit here, right? In the early days of the World Wide Web, privacy was not a thing, right? And then as we started getting sort of maturing, and with GDPR and like that started to shine a light on privacy and sort of evolve, I would say, societal expectations of personal privacy when you are in an online environment. And I
mm.
think we've sort of learned from that. And I think there's similar expectations, if not more expectations of AI, where people are saying, look, this is great technology. We absolutely should adopt it, but we have to do it in the right way.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great parallel, the path that we took around privacy in the web, and certainly, that's been a journey and a journey that continues for, many
Indeed.
parts of the world, unfortunately, maybe. But definitely, and then there's, of course, an intersection there between privacy and the use of AI and the data underneath, because that is another use case that does have some risk. You can argue how much, I suppose, but certainly that's an area that does overlap a lot and needs to be dealt with in a comprehensive, approach.
That's right. I would say that it intersects to a degree,
Mm,
right? Because and the reason I say that is, the path that we're on. I think the AI is going to be pretty prevalent everywhere, right?
yeah,
Not every AI use case is necessarily going to involve personal data, right? So if I'm taking a document and I'm using an LLM to summarize it, right, as long as that document does not contain personal data, I'm not really
right.
in a privacy impacting space, right?
Yep.
But that being said, to your point, where it is privacy impacting, or I'm using AI to make decisions, right, that might
Mm,
impact a natural human being, certainly those issues do intersect, right? And
yeah,
so, one of the things that you now have to look at is when you do, say, a privacy impact assessment, are you factoring in, the use of that data to deliver services, to
right.
train and enhance your AI? Have you gotten the right level of consent from the person or persons that the data
Mm,
belongs to? So those issues absolutely start to intersect and need to be factored in when the use case warrants it, for sure.
yeah. Yeah, and I guess there are other factors there too. I mean, privacy obviously a big risk, but then there's security in general and data security, but not just data security, but privacy around the use of the AI, or security around the use of the AI, and any vulnerabilities that it might have as well. So Yeah.
Absolutely. And we tend to think about it in a few different ways, right? So one is, sort of your basic cybersecurity. You need to have a secure solution, right?
Mm,
The second thing is just by the nature of some of the LLM technologies, you're now putting more data, more footprint in the cloud.
mm,
And how do you
yeah.
sort of secure that? And then the last piece of it is, the AI race is well and truly on, and every company is putting AI into their products with its own footprint, with its own
Mhm.
security protocols. And so, as you have vendors from who you might be buying sort of box software or software as a service, and they have AI, the third party risk of, all of that AI certainly needs to be factored in as well.
Mm.
So, absolutely. I mean, security is absolutely top of mind.
And I mean that seems like that mirrors a little bit the journey that we've been on with software as a service and cloud and adoption and the security profiles there. The vendors have to live to a higher standard, or in fact, the risk is just too great, and it wouldn't really be a reasonable solution. So that makes sense. I'm curious though. When we talk about all these things, obviously we're talking about potential for a lot of value, but how do you quantify the value of responsible AI, particularly around risk mitigation and compliance? And then how, and it's a challenge, or it seems like it is to me. So how can they address that? How can they calculate that value effectively?
Yeah, I mean, this is not unique to responsible AI, right? Anytime you have a risk avoidance program, what's the price of a risk that you've avoided? But let me offer a couple of ways to sort of think about it, right? So I'll go back to privacy and GDPR, right? When GDPR came about, right? Think about how much sort of the average consumer-facing company had to re-architect their code and solutions to
Mhm.
make it GDPR compliant. Think about that cost, think about that effort, think
Right.
about potentially the lost innovation time because you had to do that, right?
Mhm.
Now, if you started, right, and look, we can debate how quickly and how much and where and the geographies of where AI is going to get regulated,
Sure.
right? But I think we can agree that some form of regulation will occur, right? Even if not direct AI regulation, certainly indirect regulations from, say like, the financial services sector and so
Mhm.
on. So, the if you design it from the start with responsible principles in mind, we believe that you'll be in a better position to comply with the intent of those regulations. And so then you're not trying to sort of, I guess, reverse engineer or sort of bolt on compliance at that moment. And so that's a long way of me saying, look, if you do the right things now, it it'll put you in a good spot. It won't slow you down later, and that's before we think about any sort of adverse events that might
Mm.
occur as a result of not following the right responsible principles in your
Sure.
AI journey.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it kind of comes back to something I say around governance and compliance all the time. It's the intentionality around it, right? I want to go into this with the idea that I'm going to set this foundation, and I'm going to build the organization, the tools, all those things around that foundation, so that I am intentional about the way I approach this, and then I can reduce the risk as much as possible because of that intentionality up front.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that intentionality, right, might might give take a few extra cycles at the upfront,
Mm.
but it saves you, in our view, a lot and lot of cycles down the line.
Yeah, I mean, that agree. That makes a lot of sense from a governance risk compliance sort of perspective. Is that time up front is essential for the outcomes in the end, and yeah, makes a lot of sense. So one of the things I saw in the survey that I'm curious about digging into a little bit more is this idea that there are certain progress is lacking in certain capabilities around responsible AI implementation. So, can you talk a little bit about that? What are those capabilities, and then why do you think organizations struggle with this?
Yeah, and again, going back to my comment around it's a spectrum, right? If
Mm,
you look at sort of the capabilities, right? And you say, hey, does one capability stand out versus the other, in terms of where people might be doing a good job versus not, right? It's not really the case, right? And you sort of have to look a little bit deeper in the data to understand what's going on.
Mm,
So there are certain organizations that are extremely strong in certain aspects of it. For example, right, model risk management is something that's very established in the financial services sector and the insurance sector,
right.
right? The model risk management is not a problem. They can use that foundation to sort of build the right sort of model risk governance for Gen
Mm,
AI and so on, right? So, if you look at sort of financial services, they were very good there, right? You switch over to some, let's say a company that's, say, an industrial products company, right? They've never had that capability, so they struggle, right?
yeah.
Similarly, if you see, retail, they've been used to large sort of large data sets of consumer data, right?
Hmm.
And so their privacy office is, arguably great, right? And
Hmm.
so, so it tends to vary a little bit by sort of industry sector. I would say, model risk, cyber, privacy, data governance, right? If you
Sure.
sort of take these, I'll say the big four, right? Um, I think you see, ebbs and flows, if you will, based on industry sector. But
Mm,
what it's also seeing is that, no organization sort of has it sort of
mm,
down pat, right?
right.
The one last thing I'll say, Michael, is I think across the board, people are trying to figure out training and upskilling of individuals, right? It's
Right.
right, and that seems to be pretty across the board. How do you sort of live in this new world of especially Gen AI, right?
Mm,
So we're seeing a lot of, we need to drive awareness, we need to drive upskilling, we need folks to treat this just like any other technology in some ways in terms of how you approach it with care. um, and that's just going to be a little bit harder in, some of the industries that are maybe not as
sure.
digital native, right?
Yep.
But it is, fairly uniform across the board.
Mm. I mean, I think that's a great point that there's a lot of variability in the specific, right? You can be generic and general across business, but if you
Right.
start to dig into it in specific, if I'm in financial services, traditional AI is not new, right? I've been using algorithms and
Absolutely not.
models for many years, so I have good expertise there, but it may be in some other areas where I'm lacking versus an industrial manufacturer who's never done anything with AI in the past and now is, moving heavily into all sorts of types of automation that could really make a big difference in their business, but they don't have the skills in-house to do that up front. So you have to make sure you approach that in a responsible way as well.
And in a customized way, right?
Mm,
Educating your average professional in an organization where there has not been sort of that history of using AI
mhm.
might look a lot different than, to your point, in a financial services organization.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, any across any of the different industries, they're gonna have certain levels of expertise in parts, and then other parts are gonna be deficient, so you have to really build that program based on your internal assessment of your skills and experiences across your business. So,
Exactly right.
yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So one of the areas that I've been really interested in for several years actually, and did some work even when I was back at IDC, like 10 years ago or more, is around decision intelligence. And using now, we've gone to kind of a different level of discussion around decision intelligence and automation. So how is AI becoming more integrated into that decision making, or like I said, as I call it, decision intelligence? And how can organizations, be transparent, ensure fairness in those AI-driven decision outcomes?
Yeah, what I'm seeing is that there's really a bright line, right, between sort of AI that makes decisions, right, versus AI that's sort of an enabler,
Mm,
or helps with automation of, say, a workflow or a task or what have you, right? Um, uh,
mm,
I foresee that, for AI that makes decisions, right, we're gonna be a little bit slower to adopt some of the newest generative AI technologies, right?
mhm,
As you know, generative AI is by its nature non-deterministic, repeatability is always a challenge. And so where you're making a decision and you need to measure, you know, generative AI may not be the right tool for you, at least as of today, right?
Mm,
Now, we know that the technology is moving extremely fast, and we might be having a very different conversation a year from now, 2 years from now. But I do see, when we're making decisions, we perhaps stay more in sort of the traditional machine learning, predictive analytics
mm,
type of model, where you can explain things like weights. You can explain sort of, how you got to a result. There's a body of evidence that you can show that sort
mm,
of gets you to an answer, right?
yeah.
And so I think it remains to be seen whether, generative AI is ultimately used for sort of large scale decision making. I think the one way we can see it being used in the short term is with human in the loop, right?
Mm,
So if generative AI can, do some of the mundane pieces for you, but then you're applying human judgment to the output, that might be a way to sort of use Gen AI in
mm,
a situation where you're making decisions, right?
right.
But I think it was going to be fascinating to see, whether that's sort of the limit, right? Or whether, at some point it becomes good enough, accurate enough that you can put in all of the risk mitigation measures
Mm,
and it's still efficient, cost effective, et cetera, right? Today, it feels like the amount of burden you'd have to sort of evidence that it's doing the right thing over and over and over again without a human in the loop would be
mm,
challenging. So.
yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, one of you mentioned human in the loop, and I think that one is extremely important, especially when you're talking about generative AI. But what I've seen over time is that underneath this, for the full automation piece, it's not really standalone Gen AI kinds of tools right now. It is more of a combination of things. So maybe the generative AI provides you with some sort of conversational interface, but the machine learning models that you've been using all these years, predictive algorithms, that sort of thing, are really doing the actual decision making, decision automation piece. So it's not strictly generative AI. But then above that, you've got, as you said, human in the loop, or even in some cases human oversight, right? It's a repeatable
That's right.
process, but there are enough exceptions that I want someone sitting on top of that to handle those exceptions
That's
versus I
correct.
want somebody making that decision all the time. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think there's been a little bit of, it's not just sort of a push button solution where a decision
Right.
sort of pops out at the end, right?
Mm,
What you described is exactly right. It's sort of an ensemble of different technologies
yeah.
that are working together and are being orchestrated with human oversight to
Mm,
get the outcome. And frankly, I think that approach makes a ton of sense, because for certain things like math, like
yeah.
LLM is not really the right
Not gonna
technology to use, right?
Nope.
So why spend all your tokens and cost to
Mm,
have an LLM do math when you can use an ensemble approach to
yeah.
use the right tool for the right job, right? So.
Yeah, yeah, that I think that's exactly from a decision intelligence perspective, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, we tend to. I see this a lot when we talk about AI. We need to be more specific, or we talk about AI in general. Are we talking about generative? Are we talking about machine
That's
learning, or neural networks, or all these different technologies that we've been using for many, many years, and they are proven. But now they're getting a lot more attention because of all of the press and, maybe hype is a good word to use around here sometimes for generative AI over the last 2 years or so, right?
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so the survey also talked about benefits, and one of the ones that is really interesting to me, or actually two of them really, but one is around customer experience, because obviously that's an area that companies are very concerned about, and it is customer expectations have changed dramatically over the last 20
Sure.
years. So it is something that's difficult to deliver. So maybe we could talk about customer experience a bit in this context, and then also the other one. And we kind of touched on this a little bit, but this is very important, I think, too. And that's this concept around improving your cybersecurity posture underneath all of these different technologies. So, could you talk a little bit about how responsible AI is improving customer experience, how it could be used, and we can see it improve cyber security?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I think without a doubt, as we learn more and sort of exploit AI more, right,
Mhm.
we can do things that are more customized, things that are more context aware, things that are more personalized, right? And all of those things drive, in our view, a good customer experience, right?
Right.
Now, if you're able to do that responsibly, right, even better, and now you've achieved what is now an incremental outcome, right,
Mhm.
with AI, and the world sort of better for it. So,
Right.
we see responsible AI as a way to say, look, AI has this amazing potential, right? Right, and
Mm.
that potential, to realize that potential, you gotta have people believe that what they're getting at the end of it is right, is correct.
Mm.
Their sort of privacy rights have been respected, their data is secure, so on and so forth, right? And that's why, this was sort of a response, when we asked in the survey, what do you think are the benefits? This is where I think the respondents also felt the same way, where they said, look, this is what we think responsible AI can enable, because it's one thing to show sort of this amazing sort of technology, but if people don't trust it, people don't use it,
Mm.
then then the value is, in our view, diminished, right? So
Right.
so that's how responsible AI, in our view, sort of enables that.
Mhm.
Now, go ahead.
I was just kind of in the end, it seems to always come back to trust, right?
It does, right?
Right.
And maybe an analogy here, right? I taught grad students in a previous life, and I used a lot of analogies, right? But if you look at airplanes today, right, your average airplane can land itself, right?
Mhm.
And now, most of the time, the pilot lands it, certainly in good weather. But when the weather's really bad,
Mm.
right, they do use that auto land capability because people trust it, that it works,
Yeah.
and that's why it's in every single airplane that's out there today, right? And so it's a similar thing, right? You have to get people to have that level of trust in your technology, that even though it's AI, even though it may not be, even though it's technology today where it might have been a human in the past, that the outcome you're getting is as good, if not better,
Mhm.
than what it used to be, right? So yes, it absolutely does come down to trust.
Mm. I mean, I see that too in customer experience when you're, interacting. And I surveyed last year around, how people wanted to interact with companies and trying to understand different methods. And one of the things that I saw very clearly is if you ask somebody, do you want to talk to a chatbot or a human? You know what they're going to say, right? They're going to say a
Mm,
human
yeah,
almost
right,
every time, right?
right.
But if you step back and you ask the question differently and you go, think of times when you've interacted with a company through a chatbot, and what was your experience like, or did you get resolution? That is a very different answer. And if you take it further and you go, are you comfortable if you know that you're interacting with a chatbot, but you can escalate to a human at any point in time and it maintains all the context? That's a perfectly acceptable solution to most people.
Yes,
But it comes
absolutely.
down to that experience, right? And the ability to feel like I have the transparency and trust built into that lets me get to the right point of resolution, no matter what that situation might be.
That's correct. And I would add, what was your experience sort of on that journey as well, right? So
Right.
if you've sort of bumped up against press one, press two, press five, right, versus something a little bit more interactive, you might feel a little better about using that service up to the point where you need it to get escalated to a human, a
Right,
representative, right?
right.
But it's interesting you bring that up, Michael, because call centers is an area where we're
Mm,
seeing a lot of promise of this technology, as you might imagine, right?
yep.
Again, not to replace humans, right? but to be able to use the technology to call up the right data points, right? To understand
Mm,
what the caller is concerned about, right?
right.
To
Right.
bring sort of the relevant bits of their history with the company on the screen for the representative to use, right?
Right.
Gen AI powered search, if you will, to surface the
Hmm.
right bits of information. So, it's really interesting how, you can use AI sort of side by side with humans and truly change the experience, right?
Right.
Even without a push button solution,
Mm,
you're handling calls faster, you're getting to the right answer quicker, you're satisfying more customers, right?
mm,
It's in my view a lesson in how AI does not need to take it all over
right.
to have positive outcomes.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's a really interesting place that we've started to see is this idea of assistance, and not just in customer service, although that's one of the areas where I think there's huge benefit because of the fact that you expect one agent to be able to deal with multiple customers at the same time across such a broad range of knowledge that they can't easily sort through all of those different possibilities by themselves, but with an AI assistant, they could easily get through that data very quickly and surface the right possibilities for the human then to apply, for the very specific situation. So it's almost the combination of both skill sets in the right way at the right time.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think the other thing that you mentioned in there too around around the capability to change that interaction. So not the old IVR driven kind of,
Mhm.
logic tree driven chat bot, but in this new world, a natural conversation that then can move to a human when needs to be, or it could resolve your issue up front easily if it's something that is, in the knowledge base and resolvable and something that the chatbot could work through, which over time that has to improve the trust and confidence of that
Certainly going in
technology.
that direction.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Well, so we talked a lot about what we're doing today and where companies are, but I'd love to take a minute and kind of step back a little bit and just take advantage of your expertise in this and see where do you think this is going? What do you predict that's next for responsible AI? And then what are maybe if we look a little bit further out, and I know that's really hard with AI because I feel like I've looked out till tomorrow and I'm already lost. I mean, it's it's changing very quickly, right? But what are the trends? Like what can companies look for in the near future that could be an even better experience for them, or an even better business driver of business outcome?
Yeah. So to answer your first question, what do we see sort of in the future for responsible AI, right? Um, I really do believe, right, even though it doesn't feel like it, we're at a beginning of a very long journey, right? And some point we'll look back and sort of laugh about how basic things were at this moment in time, even though it doesn't
Mm,
feel that way today. So look, I think a lot of companies have started down that responsible AI path, right? They've rewritten some of their policies, they've thought about governance, right? But this is going to be an ongoing thing that they're going to need to pay attention to, right? They're going to need to bring different risk management capabilities online. They're going to have to operationalize these capabilities because AI is going to be, we believe, everywhere in the organization. And
mm,
so it's not just enough to have a paper policy. There needs to be real technology and real capabilities to govern this on
mhm.
an ongoing basis and monitor and take corrective action if and when needed, right? So I think that's where we're going to go from a responsible AI perspective, where we understand the risks, we understand like what we need to care for. How do we take that and then operationalize it is, I think, what a lot of what organizations
Right.
are going to be focused on.
Mm,
More broadly, look, I think today a lot of what is being done is trying to infuse AI and automate existing processes, right? And I
mm,
think over time, organizations will need to think about, well, if a process had steps A through E, are those even the right steps? Or do we need to reimagine the process? Do we need to transform transform our business, or transform our workflows in a world where AI is intrinsic. Do those same old process flows work, right? And so
Mm,
I think we're going to see a lot of businesses looking to sort of ground up, look to reinvent how they do things with
mm,
AI, right? With human in the loop, but with AI. And I think that's going to be sort of the long-term play.
mm. Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, I in another part of my tech career many years ago, I led large projects, implementation projects, and one of the things that we always struggled with, and so this seems like it's a parallel through almost all technology adoption cycles, is the idea that we're replacing, back then it was replacing manual processes with some sort of a system
Mhm.
process, and people were extremely resistant to doing it differently, even though we knew the process was going to be in a machine versus a physical thing. And so you'd get in
Mhm.
arguments about, well, but this ledger should be blue, and because it's
Mhm.
always been blue and I need it to be blue, right? I mean, it's that mental resistance to doing things differently that we have to get past, because we are in fact dealing with a completely new way of doing that process and improving that process in ways that we haven't even thought about yet.
That's exactly right. And that's why I say we're at the beginning of the journey, right?
Mm,
Like we are look, when we think about ideas today, most ideas that I see are how do we make this thing go faster or more efficient, right? But it's the
right.
same thing to your point. What is the different thing? And I think that's where all of us
Mm,
collectively are need to sort of expand
yeah.
our minds
Mm,
to see, the art of the possible is going to be very different
yeah.
very shortly here.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. Well, Rohan, really good conversation. Really enjoyed it, and I unfortunately we're running a little bit short on time. But before I let you go, the one thing that I always love to get in at the end is some recommendation for the audience, some thought leader or an author, book, website, whatever you think would be relevant for them to follow and learn from.
I had the pleasure of attending a session at Wharton some months ago with Professor Ethan Malik, who is one of the preeminent voices, as you might know, on Gen AI. I really enjoy his stuff.
Mm,
He has his podcast. Follow that. He's pretty prolific on LinkedIn. I do like him a lot. I would um, recommend following him.
Great. Yeah, no, great recommendation, and I often, read his post on LinkedIn and have learned tremendous amount from so yeah, great recommendation. Well, Rowan, thanks so much again for joining. I really appreciate it, and, I know the audience got a lot of good, information out of the, episode, so thank you.
Of course, good to be here.
And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining. Remember to hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform to help others find the show. For more on AI and other software research reports, briefs, and blog posts, check out arionresearch.com. If you have AI, generative AI, or business automation expertise, either as a provider or as an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arionresearch.com, and we'll see if we can get you on as a guest. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arion Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.